lowering the risk to some degree, that we will see a continued decline in the coming years. For the next few years, a bit less risk, 41% probability of a stock decline compared to 45% under the status quo. So I do think that was positive. I'll note that stakeholders advising the commissioners, U.S. stakeholders, really struggled with how precautionary they thought we should be in our decisions about the stock. And it wasn't because of disagreement over the status of the resource, but just a question of whether the pain of additional reductions, how likely that would be to result in changes in stock condition near term. That said, stakeholders, after they gave us our recommendations, U.S. commissioners deliberated quite a bit and ultimately decided that deeper cuts were warranted in areas 3A, 3B, 4A, and 4C, so from South Central Alaska out into the Aleutians, both in response to area-specific conditions in those areas and to get the overall coast-wide TCEY down to a bit lower level of risk. I'll note that the U.S. Commissioner's decisions avoided major impacts to the charter sector in both 2C and 3A by really carefully considering the potential effects of different levels of cuts in light of the charter management measures that trigger reductions in allowable fish sizes and closed days, et cetera, when specific thresholds are reached. So that took some conscious effort, but I think we got to a good place on that. We also maintained the 1.65 million pound allocation for Area 2A off the U.S. West Coast. That was kind of the one bright spot in the setline survey that indicated a 10% increase off the West Coast relative to 2022. And the allocation on the West Coast is, of course, very important to the 13 halibut treaty tribes that depend on that resource, as well as to other West Coast users. Last couple of things I'll mention. The Commission adopted its first ever statement on climate change, joining a number of regional fishery management organizations that have such statements about how they will consider the effects of climate change and ecosystem responses in their management decisions. So that was positive. And the commissioners also discussed potential design changes or designs for the annual fishery independent setline survey in coming years and options for dealing with a funding shortfall that has really constrained that survey. The commissioners will be meeting virtually next week to make final decisions about the 2024 survey once the Secretariat has, well, I should say now that the Secretariat has received bids from the vessels interested in participating. We're trying very hard to maintain coverage outside just the core areas of the stock and particularly in the Bering Sea to get a handle on what's going on in the resource throughout its range. But that's been a real struggle. The Commission has been reliant on a model of revenue neutrality, trying to have the proceeds from fish sales from the survey pay for the costs of the survey. And that just doesn't pencil out anymore with decreasing fish prices, decreasing catch, and increasing costs of the survey. So my feeling, which I've been advocating for at the Commission, as well as with others, is that both the contracting parties really need to be subsidizing the survey to enable that to continue and make sure we're getting the data that we need for management for the future. So thanks for indulging me.
Thank you, Mr. Curlin. Appreciate the comments. Ms. Kimball.
Thank you. And thank you for those additional comments, Mr. Curlin. That feeds into what was going to be my question, but after your statements on the survey, I wasn't quite understanding whether Area 4, whether the Bering Sea, for example, is considered kind of part of this core survey work that's being bid on, or what the process is for 2024. Are we seeing what kind of bids we get with the fixed funding we have and then allocating the survey appropriately? I just want to find out if Area 4 is included. And if you don't know that yet, that's a fair answer, but I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, thanks. Through the chair, Ms. Kimball, the commission has not made final decisions on that, but we decided to go out with what's called a request for tenders, basically a request for bids, to include 4A and 4B, as well as 4C, D, and E, and see what the bids are, and then see what we can afford, basically. So stay tuned, but we don't have a decision yet.
Thank you. My second question might probably for Dr. Stewart, and if it's too broad, just let me know, but we've seen similar figures on recruitment, and I just wanted to hear from you kind of what is the state of the science on why we're in this very low recruitment phase? We hear a lot of information in our other reports for groundfish, but not having heard all of the IPHC reports, I wondered if you could summarize what that looks like right now. Why are we in this low phase?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair. So our understanding for stock and recruitment relationships for Pacific halibut is that there is a very weak, if any, relationship between the spawning biomass and the subsequent recruitment. We've seen, actually, I won't try to go back to the figure, but in the long time series figure that I had up a few minutes ago of recruitment, you can quite clearly see a very big shift from the 60s and 70s here we are, with large recruitments going from the late 1970s all the way through the early 2000s, particularly that period in the late 70s and early 1980s that we know was a big transition for the ecosystems in the North Pacific. That corresponds, as you can see in this figure at the top there, the phases of the PDO or the regimes of the PDO are listed there. That corresponds quite closely with the positive phase of the PDO. And indeed, many of the council's own reference points are based around this period of shifting productivity from the late 1970s to the more recent period. With regard to this most recent period of low recruitment, we don't know why recruitment's been so low in the last several years. It did correspond to a negative phase of the PDO, but despite our best efforts, we were unable to find very strong correlates to annual recruitment deviations. So we understand that it's not tightly coupled with spawning biomass. It seems to be responding to broad changes in the environment, but we don't have the ability to predict right now good versus poor recruitments. And in fact, I think if anything, our uncertainty's probably gone up in the last few years because the ecosystem conditions in the North Pacific have become more variable. Some of the correlations among factors that used to be quite solid appear to be breaking down. For example, we're seeing warm water in the Aleutian Islands, even under conditions that used to indicate cold conditions in the Aleutians. So quite honestly, we're at a period of low productivity and low predictability right now.
Thank you, Dr. Stewart and Mr. Twite.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Two questions. One maybe from Mr. Curlin first. That I'm heartened to hear that the IPHC has issued a statement on climate change. I'm wondering, from your perspective, how does it match up with what our current sort of work plan is as a council and what our path forward in terms of addressing climate change issues from a council perspective? Do the two complement each other? Is there anything we can learn from each other? Can we help each other?
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Twite, I guess I'd characterize the commission's statement as one of kind of reflecting the importance of integrating climate change considerations into the commission's decision-making and also the commission's operations relative to its survey and so forth. It's not, it doesn't get into how to operationalize that. And I think that's really what this council is wrestling with. So if you have any trouble locating it on the website, I'd be happy to steer you to the commission statement, just for awareness. Certainly not incompatible with what this council is doing.
Thanks. And second question, and I'm not sure for which of you it is, but sort of reflecting on both the presentation and the realization that the spawning biomass of the stock is at a very low point compared to most of the historical record. And then still thinking about Dr. Stewart's words right there in response to Ms. Kimball about greater uncertainty. And certainly we're grappling with the same issue. I've asked this question before, so I apologize for sounding like a broken record, but I don't understand why in the face of those circumstances, the commission isn't giving very serious consideration to changes to the management framework that would move harvest away from focusing on mature mature females that are the spawning biomass. And wondering if either of you can sort of shed any light on, in terms of the commission's continuing position that they continue to adopt the current management framework and therefore the current harvest targeting.
Thank you through the chair. And perhaps before I answer that question, a brief addition to the previous question. We rely very heavily at a technical level on the products produced through the North Pacific Council system and by NOAA Fisheries Science Center. So the information that we use to guide our own response to how to model and how to track ecosystem conditions comes from the ecosystem reports provided by NOAA Fisheries here. So we work very closely, and the commission relies very heavily on NOAA Fisheries because we don't have the resources to do that level of monitoring. We do some pretty extensive monitoring of depth, temperature, and salinity as part of our survey, and we provide that information back. So we do collaborate, but we also rely heavily on NOAA Fisheries. With regard to your second question, I can provide a brief status update on our evaluation of size limits and other tools, both minimum and maximum size limits, to try and refine the management approach. We have, of course, done several size limit analyses in the last several years. Each one has found that there is potentially a marginal gain in yield to the stock at no conservation cost. And this comes by shifting some of the mortality from older, larger females to younger males, for which we don't have a shortage of in this stock. It appears that the biggest challenge in actually implementing some of those changes has been uncertainty in the response of the market, especially to an increase in the amount of small halibut and the potential for a price that would offset or more than offset the yield gain that could be had by shifting harvest toward those smaller fish.
Sure, go ahead.
Thanks. And then not a question, just a comment. Really appreciate the cooperation of the commission for the e-logbook work that we've done so far, and assuming that we recommend the EFP and it moves forward, certainly welcome the continuing cooperation there, maintaining stakeholder sort of confidence in, but support for our fishery dependent data gathering is just so crucial. And things like the e-logbook just make a ton of sense in that perspective. So really appreciate your support and your active help at making it work.
Thank you, Mr. Twite. Not seeing any further questions. Thank you again for your report.
Thank you.
So that concludes our B reports. We're ready to move on to public testimony. It looks like we have 14 people signed up to testify. Excuse me, before we move on, I think we have another question. Ms. Kimball.
I did. I apologize for interrupting. I just wanted to know, prior to getting testimony, whether the IRA funding proposals or the update that we received under B1, is that something that staff were looking for feedback from the public and the council on, or is that really just informational? And I asked because of my questions previously on some of the local knowledge and traditional knowledge objectives.
Madam Chair, Ms. Kimball, that is for information only. We submitted that proposal by the deadline, which was the end of January.
Thank you. So we will now transition to public testimony. We have 14 people signed up. We'll go through the list in order. As a reminder, companies and individuals will have 3 minutes and associations and organizations 6 minutes. If you go, there will be a timer on the screen. If you go over, I'll offer a friendly reminder and ask you to provide a concluding comment. For those of you testifying remotely, you'll be unmuted when it is your turn to speak. And please make sure you're in a quiet place with good internet connection so that we are able to hear you well. So with that, I think we're ready to begin, and we will start with Garrett Elwood, and he's joining us remotely, followed by Linda Bankin.
Hi there, you got me?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Madam Chair, council members, wanted to comment in support of item B2. My name is Garrett Elwood, and I own and operate the fishing vessel Western Freedom and the Alaskan halibut sablefish fisheries. I'd like to comment briefly today on the exempted fishing permit application that the real-time data team has submitted. Approval would temporarily exempt participating fishermen like myself from the requirement to print electronic logbook sheets in the wheelhouse. I participated in the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation project in 2023, which provided the deckhand logbook equipment and app for me to use on my vessel. My experience with the deckhand team and their technology was excellent. Adoption of this technology in our fleets offers a paradigm shift in the way we collect, catch, and trip data at sea. Recording my logbook data using deckhand required a fraction of the time compared to hand writing logs, and the deckhand software offers a seamless integration during my wheelhouse operations, enabling a safer and more efficient way to record data set by set. Paper logbooks are subject to human error and are more time-consuming for operators. My only complaint after a season of use was the requirement to print our electronic logbooks. This process was problematic and frustrating at times. After one season, I believe electronic logbooks are the future, and requiring printed log sheets is counterintuitive when considering the ease and efficiency achievable in 2024 when employing commonplace technologies for logbook data collection. My wheelhouse is small, packed with a lot of essential electronics for navigation and safe operation, and I found myself wondering, this is an electronic logbook. Why am I having to mess around with a printer and rolling and pitching wheelhouse? Fishing hard often results in a diminished cognitive capacity, and I do not always have the bandwidth nor the room to deal with printers. I'm in support of the EFP and the opportunities it presents for us to move forward in adopting better ways to collect data at sea. I firmly believe that the deckhand product is one of these opportunities, and in 2024, burdening fishermen with keeping printers alive and functioning on small vessels is simply unnecessary. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Elwood. I'll see if there are any questions for you. Seeing none, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
So next up is Linda Bankin.
Madam Chair, I've asked Abby to join me because we have essentially the same testimony just to save you time.
I'm glad she introduced me. Otherwise, it probably would have sounded rude if I had started. Madam Chair, members of the council, my name is Abigail Turner Franke. I work with North Pacific Fisheries Association out of Homer, Alaska. NPFA represents commercial fishermen and their families who participate in multiple federal fisheries, and NPFA and our individual members have been early supporters and participants in the development of electronic technologies for the purpose of electronic monitoring and now electronic reporting in the region. NPFA has worked closely with other industry groups like Alpha, the agency, OLE, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, and EM and now ER service providers to innovate and integrate these new technologies in a way that works for industry and management. But most importantly, advances our shared goal of sustainable fisheries. We would like to express our support for real-time data's exempted fishing permit application. I'm going to skip ahead to give Linda more time. But the fleet is clearly supportive of e-logbooks. And we, as mentioned earlier by Mr. Solberg, there are concerns that in addition to the burden of having a printer on board, or in some cases actually double reporting, like filling it out on an e-log and still doing it in paper because they can't fit a printer on board. There's that, what if the printer doesn't work? And we all know what it's like to have issues with the printer. So we hope that the council sees the benefit of an EFP to relieve fishermen participating in the project until regulation can be modernized to accommodate what we think is a tool that could improve data quality and provide more timely access to data for better informed in-season management decisions.
Thank you, Linda Benkin with Alaska Longline Fishermen's Association. Just want to second everything that Garrett and Abby have said. Our organization has been participating in developing this logbook as well. We're really excited to move it forward. One of the reasons we see real benefits for the logbook is the ability to continue to provide data from the commercial fishing fleet on sablefish that has been getting difficult to gather in the last couple of years, and make sure that that data is available to the stock assessment team for sablefish on a timely basis. So we've been working with our fleet. We've found real-time data to be extremely receptive to any concerns or problems that the fleet experiences to improve the software. But the printers have definitely been a challenge for some of the small boats. Some of our small boats participating in this are skiffs, and it's not easy to keep a printer safe in a skiff. So the CFP is important. We're supporting moving this ahead, and appreciate the council's support as well. Just because I'm up here, I'm also going to take a minute to say from our association, we're very excited about the climate workshop you have planned for the spring, and really appreciate the council's decision to take a hard look, or have your SSC take a hard look at harvest control rules and use sablefish as one of the test cases for that. And I just wanted to thank you for moving that work ahead as well.
Thank you both. It looks like we have a question, Mr. Mesro.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you both for combining your similar testimony. Just appreciate that. I was just thinking, we had done essentially the same thing where we tested out logbooks for the charter fleet, electronic logbooks through Fish and Game. And one of the issues that we experienced was that law enforcement wanted us to have some way to record catch data no matter what, whether the iPad stopped working or the computer program seized up. And so that what they require us to do is carry an additional paper logbook on the boat, and should we have an equipment failure with our electronic logbook, to at least record during the failure period on paper. So if this moves forward, that wouldn't be a problem for your fleets to do that if that was what was required. It's really the keeping a printer running and printing the things out is the issue, not keeping a backup logbook, right?
Yeah, I could, through the chair, Mr. Mesro, nobody out there would set gear without marking down where their set was. So certainly if you weren't able to do it electronically, you'd be writing it on something, in a logbook, and people have the older logbooks on board to use in that situation. So yes, it's the issue of having room for a printer and keeping it working, particularly after it just went flying across the wheelhouse in rough weather.
Mr. Twite.
Not a question, just a reflection that we've really made a lot of changes over the last few years on fishery monitoring, and the vast majority of them have been industry driven, like this one as well. And just a thanks for that. Takes a lot of work to get even to this point, and we're still not anywhere near all the way through, but appreciate the work that both of you and your organizations have put in, and others as well.
Thank you.
Well, I also, through the chair, want to turn that back around and thank you for your leadership on the EM committee. I mean, I think we were having a lot of difficulty making headway with that technology until you took over chairmanship. And we've made some real progress and appreciate your willingness to work with us to move that ahead.
So we're really talking about Dan Falvey, actually.
Well, you played your role too.
Thank you both for your testimony. So next up is President John Malavidoff and Dr. Lauren Devine, followed by Charlie Wright.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, council members. My name is John Malavidoff. I'm the tribal president of the Aleut community of St. Paul. Fairly new to the job. I've been in the seat for 4 months now, taking over for Amos Filimonov, who is our longtime president in St. Paul. Excuse me for my shaky voice. This is my first time here at the council meetings, and just here to kind of soak everything up and learn the process, and looking forward to meeting everybody. So thanks. So we're bringing our resolution to the council today. Typically, the February meeting is traditionally when the marine mammal update is heard. And in recent years, the ecosystem committee heard co-presentations from co-managers. We are working with NMFS on the Northern Fur Seal Plan, and hope for that to be an internal review in April. And we look forward to co-presenting as co-managers. We're seeking a collaborative process to address one of the tribe's primary concerns, and that is northern fur seals. It's been one of our primary concerns for a long time now. And we have yet to see the numbers bounce back from the commercial fur sealing industry. The tribal council kind of chose some of the language in the resolution as hoping to get action out of the resolution. And yeah, that's all I have. Turn over to Dr. Devine. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I just would reiterate that we wanted to bring the resolution to the North Pacific Fishery Management Council during this meeting, as this was typically the time when you hear marine mammal updates. Typically, the Ecosystem Committee has been hearing in recent years a co-presentation on northern fur seal updates annually, and that has been pushed back as well. Ahead of having any type of formal ask, we wanted to just bring the resolution in a public process and get that on the record. And we hope to have conversations that will lead to a collaborative ask with council members, staff, industry, anyone in the room. We've approached a lot of people, but if we haven't, we take this opportunity to invite that collaboration. There are many studies that have come to fruition in recent years, and I think there's a lot of science that is coming available that could be part of an update in April alongside the conservation plan revision. We have been a part of that process as co-managers, and I think that I really appreciated the dialogue between Mr. Twite and Ms. Ike earlier regarding the conservation plan and the potential for this council to hear an update from co-managers in April. So we just think there's a lot of things coalescing around northern fur seals that the council is interested in and would find relevant. And so we wanted to note that our tribal council passed this resolution, as this is one of the priority issues for the community. And we want to open this up in what we feel is the appropriate process, which is through the North Pacific Fishery Management Council process. And so we're just really want to reiterate, we would love to see this come through the council process in a collaborative way. And this is our first step to making that request. Thank you.
Let's see if there are any questions. Ms. Kimball.
Thank you. And thank you, President Malavidoff, for introducing yourself, and Dr. Devine. I did read the resolution, and I guess I was taking away from your testimony that there will be an opportunity for the council to hear the conservation plan and what that looks like. We don't have a hand in developing that at all, but we'll get to hear that from you and from the agency in April. And then that might be an appropriate time to reassess what our role is and where you're headed with that conservation plan. Is that a fair takeaway from your testimony?
Through the chair, thank you for the question. I don't want to speak too much here, but I would say that is our hope, that would be the time, and then the council would be able to have a discussion around the role that might be envisioned for that particular topic. And Mr. Swipe.
Thanks, and welcome, President Melavidoff. Look forward to getting to know you a little bit. Maybe this is just a better question for April when you make the presentation, but maybe I'll just flag sort of my curiosity, at least, about how the tribe views the path forward for addressing fur seal population size, productivity problems, et cetera, in the context of the work plan that the council sort of laid out for itself for the next few years to look at climate change resilience, to take a look at our management framework through the programmatic process. I'd just be interested in where you see some intersections or some roads that are maybe even the same roads. So, and again, I realize it's sort of an unfair question right now. But that's, I think, an area where that would be really helpful to me to understand better.
Through the chair, I love to try to answer an unfair question. I will try. Partially, I'll try to answer it. I'll say that. I won't give a complete answer. There are a lot of different conversations that Northern Fur Seals, I think, have already come into at the council recently around climate change, around multi-species assessments, around ecosystem-based fisheries management. There's a number of ways that we have already tried to engage or have been actively engaged in ongoing work of the council on behalf of Northern Fur Seals, or with Northern Fur Seals as a focus. A specific agenda item in creating what we hope will be and what we intend to be not a burdensome undertaking for the council and for staff around Northern Fur Seals and potential effects of fishing on Northern Fur Seal populations warrants its own kind of track and agenda item, in that I think it would be more effective because there will be co-managers within that conversation specifically, right? We can participate as co-managers in a number of conversations through a public process, but having Northern Fur Seals kind of have its own agenda item provides some format, whether that looks like a committee, a workshop, a subgroup, a working group. I think there's a number of ways that can be explored. And I don't know that we'll have we'll have that worked out before April, but I think there's also those conversations fit into the upcoming workshops and some of those other things that we can kind of chip away at. So I would just advocate that a specific agenda item and opening this topic up to explore it. We're not thinking of something that is, again, overly burdensome, and we don't anticipate immediate action. And that's why we wanted to bring it now, because we understand it takes time. Thinking of the council's work plan, outlook, 3 meetings, all of that. And so this is just our way to really start the conversation and open up as many conversations as we can. But we recognize and have been engaged in the ongoing conversations where we can and see a role or a place for a conversation around Northern Fur Seals. This is a specific request to think of that in its own way and an agenda item.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions. Appreciate your testimony and congratulations on your new role.
Thank you.
And next up is Charlie Wright, followed by Olivia Henayi Irwin.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Is it okay if I invite up Dr. Jim Simon to answer any questions that I might not be able to? You sit next to me.
Sure, I believe he's signed up for testimony as well.
Thank you. Okay, I'll start with my introduction. Thank you all, Madam Chair and Council. My name is Charlie Wright. I'm from Rampart, Alaska on the Yukon, where I serve on the Village Council. I also serve 37 tribes on the Yukon River on the Tana Chiefs Conference Executive Board as a Secretary Treasurer, where I sit on the Advocacy Committee. I wear many hats. I serve on many boards and commissions that pertain to salmon, Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission, Yukon River Drainage Fisheries Association. I am an alternate on the Yukon River panel, where I also serve on the new Traditional Knowledge Committee as co-chair. Okay, I'll be done now. Start my testimony. Thank you. The Tana Chief Conference is a signatory to support the petition for Chinook salmon bycatch and emergency action. We support the intent of the petition to reduce Chinook salmon bycatch for zero king salmon bycatch for 180 days, especially when the regional stocks are at an all-time low. The petition also includes reference to Pacific Salmon Treaty, which requires the United States to further reduce marine bycatch and interception of Canadian origin salmon. While at the Yukon River panel meeting in Whitehorse 2 weeks ago, the panel was given a directive. We the people of the Yukon River will not be able to fish for 7 years, one life cycle of Chinook salmon. That was a surprise to us, but if anybody has any questions about that, we could talk later. I don't have that information in front of me. We set those bycatch caps a long time ago, and right downstairs in the AP meeting, they was talking about possibly increasing Chinook bycatch because they are getting pushed off the crab areas. The bycatch caps are outdated and not accounting for the current crisis that wasn't as predominant even 10 years ago. In closing, we all need to share in the conservation of the salmon. The people of the Yukon and its contributaries have not fished for years already, and we've been carrying this burden on our shoulders all alone. So we really look to you guys for support. I really thank you for your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. I'll see if there are any questions for you. Seeing none, thank you so much. Okay, next up is Olivia Henayi Irwin, followed by Eva Dawn Burke.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. My name is Olivia Henayi Irwin. I am Athabascan and Inupiaq. I am a member of the Nenana Native Tribe in Nenana, Alaska. 4 years ago, my father passed away at the early age of 55. His suicide was directly related to the subsistence needs of our people not being met and an inaccessibility to our traditional ways of life. His spiritual nutrition was diminished to a degree in which he was no longer able to teach his children our cultural ways of harvesting fish, pass on his values at fish camp, and he fell ill to the grief of not being able to provide for his family or his community. If you're wondering how our communities are coping with the loss of Chinook and other salmon species, the answer is clear: we are not. Because the nutrients that salmon provides our people is spiritual, not physical. Efforts have recently been made to battle food insecurities within our villages, including donations from the Amonic test fishery. However, when our people's relationship to salmon is limited to opening a cardboard box of frozen fish, it bypasses the teachings of traditional knowledge, communal responsibility, respect for elders, and ceremonial practice. The teachings of our fathers are bypassed. The spiritual nutrients are foregone, and our spirits are left hollow, yearning for our salmon relatives. I request the council's support for the Chinook emergency petition. I applaud the council's efforts over the past decade to reduce Chinook bycatch numbers. However, circumstances have changed. The population continues to decline such that every salmon matters, demanding a burden of conservation to be distributed, a burden that has disproportionately fell on Alaska Natives for decades now. The exact number of fish becomes irrelevant when we turn our attention to the potential of each Chinook killed at sea. The potential that simply diminishes into missed opportunities of fathers to teach their daughters how to put up salmon in a smokehouse. It's missed opportunities to share our language, engage in song, and mentor our youth in our traditional knowledge. And while an egregious proportion of the salmon runs are not coming back, it only takes one salmon escaping a net and finding its way home to save the life of an Alaska Native struggling today. Every salmon counts. Thank you for your consideration, and I'll take any questions the council has.
We appreciate your testimony. Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your time. Next up is Eva Dawn Burke. I think she might be in the AP, so we'll circle back to her. Jim Simon.
Hi, thank you very much. For the record, my name is Jim Simon. Madam Chair and members of the council. I just wanted to provide some of my personal perspective on a question that Mr. Twite asked about in the context of the Yukon disaster declarations and the appropriations of funding for the West Coast and the various fish disasters. And specifically, Mr. Twite's question about the role of tribes or tribal organizations in the development of spend plans, et cetera. I've been involved in the preparation of letters to the governor requesting assistance for disaster declarations, as it's my understanding that that's the only avenue that Alaska tribes, federally recognized tribes, actually have to request the Secretary of Commerce to make a fishery disaster declaration. And fortunately, even though those request letters have never been acknowledged being received by the governor's office or by the department, they have been forwarded on to the Secretary of Commerce. And the development, as Ms. Baker mentioned, that NIMP's work, NOAA Fisheries works with the state of Alaska to develop a spend plan, provided by the state of Alaska. And there's public opportunities to weigh in on those spend plans. There's no tribal consultation associated with them, despite a Department of Fish and Game tribal consultation policy that was adopted in 2002. And there have been, under previous declarations, opportunities for households to submit applications for economic relief for the loss of subsistence fishing opportunities, which is, there's a lot of gratefulness for that to be provided, given that the structures for disaster declarations are really limited for commercial fishing losses, right? And one of the things that's of concern, though, that hopefully we can all work together to really evaluate is a lot of the households on the lower Yukon and lower Kuskokwim, English is a second language. And, even there have been case law, et cetera, even trying to get election ballots translated into Yuktun. And so we fear, my observation is that I'm fearful that the online and paper application process might be a barrier. And so one possibility might be to consider working collaboratively with some of the intertribal organizations to help an application process, where people from the local region could help individual households make those applications for subsistence relief. So that's just what I wanted to share. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your testimony. I'll see if there are any questions for you. Ms. Baker.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, Dr. Simon, for your testimony. And I will do my best to turn this into a question, but I very much appreciate your suggestions. Also, having worked on some COVID relief programs over the past few years, the department in developing spend plans and facilitating distribution of funds has recognized the benefit of the very process you're suggesting in terms of working with tribal entities and organizations and regional organizations to help with some of these challenges. And so in terms of the fishery disasters, the one that was referenced earlier today and a few of the ongoing ones, I hope you would be willing to talk with me and our other staff here that work on disasters to maybe provide us some suggestions for how we can do a better job of that than we have in previous programs to continue improving of that. And so is that something that you could help us out with?
Yeah, through the chair, Ms. Baker, I'd be grateful to help. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Dr. Simon. So next up is Paul Olson.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the council. My name is Paul Olson. I work for the boat company. We do eco tours and sport fishing, including for Chinook salmon in Southeast Alaska. I am also a commercial salmon trawler and fish for Chinook salmon with hooks. And I was going to talk about Chinook salmon ecology generally. I notice it's pretty much your entire April agenda, but Ms. Kimball had some questions about the Wild Fish Conservancy's petition for Gulf of Alaska Chinook salmon. And since I gave it a cursory review myself, Mr. Kurland, I think I can answer a few of them. And one of your questions was specifically the role of ADF and G data in the petition. And the petition uses ADF and G data, which most of us are familiar with. It just distorts it quite a bit. For those of you who've been around this process since we first started Gulf of Alaska, Chinook returns declined in 2013. There's a 2013 research paper on the crisis put together by ADF and G, and that's their first 5 pages. When we have had escapement failures, what Alaska Department of Fish and Game does is it establishes stock of concerns depending on the number of escapement failures over a period of time, and they produce action plans. And so the next 10 pages of the petition is graphs showing escapement failures. For different stocks, they select the weakest stocks, of course, because as I said, it's a very distorted petition. But anyway, that is where most of the underlying data comes from. They also, the Department of Fish and Game produces escapement goal reports every year. And so they've cut and pasted a few of those into their report. And from there on, they go on to anthropogenic stressors to Chinook salmon that actually don't apply to Gulf of Alaska river systems because most of them are intact, undammed, and unlogged. But it is important to note about this group is that we've talked about them before. They are interested in stopping all ocean fishing and all hatchery production. And as you continue to analyze Chinook salmon and other salmon species through your other actions over the next few years, there's some important hatchery papers about hatchery wild salmon interactions that are a hot topic among the Northwest Fisheries Science Center and probably elsewhere. And those come up, they blame hatcheries, but it's interesting, they blame pink and chum hatcheries. It's important to know that all species of salmon have different diets. They evolved that way, and they're mostly concerned about pink and chum hatcheries, which those species are planktivores. And king salmon eat a little bit of everything, but pink and chum do not overlap significantly with Chinook salmon diets. The pink salmon are one of the species that are doing quite well in warmer waters despite our 2020 crisis, and they're expanding rapidly. And it's also important to note the petition says, oh, it's always hatchery pinks. They're mostly wild, and there's going to be more of them. They've had a long pattern of even odd year cycles, which tempers and does weird things to their ecosystem effects, but it's one of the things we're going to be looking at. But I don't think it's having an impact on Chinook salmon. It's environmental drivers, climate change, and number one, and the elephant in the room that the Wild Fish Conservancy does not talk about in their petition is marine mammal predation. Or if you look at your stock assessments for orcas, you'll find they probably doubled. Resident populations in Alaska over the last 40 years, they may eat as many as 2.6 million Chinook salmon per year. Happy to talk to you guys on the side, or if you have any questions, happy to answer.
Appreciate your testimony, Mr. Olson. I'll see if there are any questions for you. Thank you. Next up is Barbara Hutnisak, followed by Kirill Basarjan.
Thank you. I'll just clarify. I made a comment that I intended on the EFP earlier during the B7 agenda item. Thank you.
And Kirill Basarjan. He's supposed to be joining us in person, but I don't see him. So we'll circle back. Oh, is he online? Mr. Basarjan, can you hear us? I think, is he unmuted? Mr. Basarjan, I think you have to unmute yourself. Okay, we'll circle back to you. Next up is John Govin, followed by Chris Woodley.
Thanks, Madam Chair, members of the council. John Govin, Alaska Seafood Cooperative. I just want to touch on two items that came up in B reports today. First one is the mention of funding being made available by NIPS PR for our killer whale research to understand the behavior and modify nets. And the second one is the report by Doctors Rose and Harris on gear research, looking at the effects of seafloor. On the first item, I just really want to express our appreciation for NIPS finding the funding. It's critical to Dr. Meyer's review of the hydrophone data that she collected on our vessel last summer so we can understand the behavior of the whales around the net and work on the gear modification. So just wanted to mention that and answer any questions on you may have. We expect to come forward in April with a report on our work at the flume tank. And then the second one is a brief comment on the report on the seafloor effects of fishing gear and research. I just really found that very timely, and I appreciate the council making time for that today. I think it really helped to put this all together. We've worked, there was information both on gear modification and what it takes to do that, to understand the effects of that, just how you understand seafloor effects and how it fits into the parameters or the outputs of the EFH modeling for fishing effects. And I've really never seen this tied together in a way that was so complete. And I really think it's important. And the reason I mention that it's important is sitting through the AP's discussions relative to the red king crab savings area, there was a lot of, I think, confusion and conflation of the outputs of the model that look at what the model will call fishing effect, or maybe called disturbance, with equating that to habitat, loss of habitat function. And those two are very different. And I thought the presentation really provided some important information there. And I think it's going to be really important that we make those distinctions and we understand what those science outputs mean. And I'm just hopeful that the AP and the public will be able to, have an opportunity to, I don't know if that is taped or there's ways the AP could have a similar presentation if the authors or the presenters today are willing, because I think that would really help them understand what they're working on and make their recommendations more valuable to the process. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Govan. I think people will be able to go back on YouTube and listen to that. We've got that ability now, fortunately. Appreciate your testimony, Mr. Curlin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Mr. Govan, on the killer whale research, I appreciate your noting the expectation to give us an update in April on the flume tank work. I wonder if you could just give the council a sense of sort of overall timing for the work in general and when we might expect to hear more after April.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So thank you for the question, Mr. Curlin, and through the chair. So the steps that I can clarify for you what we're working on is we need to understand the killer whale behavioral aspects of how they're coming around our nets, both during setting and hauling of the net, as well as when it's fishing. And so our next step in pulling the gear modifications together is to go to the flume tank in April and St. John's and look at something that starts with a gear modification that was tried by a captain last year, and probably will try to look at how we can cover more of the front of the net and what that gear mod looks like both during setting, hauling, and fishing. So we can kind of come to a consensus on what the best idea is based on the advice from marine mammal scientists on the behavior of the animals around the net. And the co-op intends, when it starts deep water flatfish fishing in May, to take the idea that comes out of the tank and put it on the boats and have everyone use it. And we're going to also be doing some field work on the boats with hydrophones to do our best to understand whether the killer whale gear modification is working, noting that this is more difficult than it might seem. And I won't get into it too far here, but normally you test a salmon excluder or a halibut excluder, you have a dependent variable to catch rate. This is trying to understand through their hydrophone data whether the animals are further away from the net and things like that. So it's going to be challenging research, but part of the funding will fund the field hydrophone deployments and people on the vessels to do them, to collect data with use of the gear mod. So we'll hopefully understand whether it's working and be better able to judge that. So we're not concluding it is working when we don't have whales around the net. There's a lot of potential or scientific type 2 error here where you conclude you're having an effect and it really wasn't what you thought. So anyway, without getting into that, that's the plan going forward. And we'll report on the first part of the flume tank stuff in April. And then after that, we'll continue our commitment to updating you on what we're doing and how it's working.
Thank you. And Ms. Baker.
Through the chair. Thank you, Mr. Govan, for your testimony. And I appreciate your reference to Dr. Rose and Dr. Harris's presentation. I think, well, I know I found it incredibly informative, as did a number of people I spoke with. And so I want to also take advantage of the time you have left here and the experience you have. And so I hope my first question is easy, because I just don't really know the answer. And then hopefully if you answer yes, I can ask you the second one. Were you involved as in your current role or as an industry participant in the development of the elevated trawl sweeps action throughout that development process and then through implementation of the regulations? Were you on that team?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Ms. Baker, through the chair. I just have to say, the way you phrased it through my remaining time, I just want to explain that. Okay, so I'm stepping down as the science projects director for the Alaska Seafood Cooperative, and Sarah Webster will be taking over from me starting in April. I intend to be involved with the sector, and some of these side projects I probably will be. So if you see me, it's probably not going to be in a hot seat. It's going to be telling you fantastic things about research. But anyway, thank you for this question. Yes, the gear modification work, as Dr. Rose mentioned, takes a lot of interaction with industry. And my role as science projects director was to get the industry. I mean, we had an idea for EFH. Mr. Curlin will remember. The concept was actually reviewed in the earlier EFH model runs back in 2005. And they were like, but how are we going to really know if this works? So I got the industry to understand that we need to engage in this area, and there was an understanding and agreement with that. But then it takes how are we going to do this? How are we going to get our captains to describe the gear we're using? And the couple of pinch points there were captains were worried about lifting those sweeps off the seafloor that fish would just escape. So the first test had to do with the catchability. With this twin trawl? And yes, one of the co-op vessels, the Cape Horn, was made available by North Star to do that work, and they did it through SRPs to first test the catchability and make sure we weren't going to just tow longer and maybe have more effect. And then the next stage was the actual research with the bottom contact sensors to make sure the elevating devices were achieving the elevation, and that was done on both the Eureka and the Cape Horn. And then throughout that, I mean, it took a lot of steps. It took the industry making their vessels and their captains available, and it really took the time of the researchers to work with me to pull this together to come up with a plan, because we didn't have the kind of sort of institutional funding that you'd want to do for this. But fortunately, the Science Center made Dr. Rose's time available, and a lot of it, and we used some BREP money we were able to get, especially when it came down to the effects on crabs, which was the next thing the SSC asked us to do. So it led to believe it or not, a 5 or 6 year project to get to understand this, and a lot of interaction between the industry. And I'm just a coordinator in that. I did go out on some of it, but really it was a lot of captains and a lot of Dr. Rose's time, and me just trying to get people to understand why we needed to do it and why it was taking so long and manage expectations. It's probably more answer than you wanted. I'm sorry.
Through the chair, that was really helpful. And you did touch on what was going to be, what is my follow-up, in the sense that your role is exactly what I was wondering. What was the incentive to keep people going through this longer process? Was it potential council actions? Was it, and it sounds like you played a key role in that, in terms of keeping the momentum going. And I'm keenly interested in that, in terms of how this council can approach that and think about, again, really encouraging science-based decision-making and understanding what that takes.
Thanks. Through the chair, I'll try to give the briefest answer for me, but Sarah Webster will give you briefer answers in the future. Okay. Part of it was just this, the pressure, on the issue of what are the effects of bottom trawls on the seafloor that motivated us. And part of it was then with crabs, what are the effects of the crabs that go under your sweeps and under your foot rope? So that's where the impetus was to do this research. What was really interesting at the beginning was that captains were not averse to the idea of gear modification, but they were worried about the loss of fish and getting some regulation saying this is how you have to do it, when we really didn't understand how much target fish we were losing. What was really interesting was seeing them look at the first slides. I think you saw that today, the catch rates for flatfish. And I won so many bets on that, because the fishermen thought if you lifted those up, the escape of flatfish would be high. And what they found out was flatfish weren't herded by hard on bottom trawling and things they thought, like the mud cloud and things like that. It was really the vibration was enough. So guess where that led? They're going further off the seafloor today than what Dr. Rose showed you today, because it's easier to tow, it reduces fuel. And the same thing with lifting our doors off the bottom. It's just more spread with less fuel. So I mean, a lot of these things kind of help. The interaction with the science gave captains a way of improving the gear for fishing and for efficiency. And so that kind of snowballed into we can do better here. And I think that's what you hope to get through these endeavors if you can. And so maybe that was just lucky, but it really, at that point, had a lot of momentum for the industry to keep going. And they've taken it further in terms of increasing the elevation of the sweeps. And the foot rope ideas that he talked about came about through the same underwater cameras looking at fish behavior and some of the other things he did. So that really was maybe serendipity, maybe it was just a good process to really help the industry move forward.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony, Mr. Galvin. So next up, we have Chris Woodley and others, question mark. And
Yeah, Madam Chair, can you hear me okay?
yes, we can.
Okay,
Welcome.
great. All right. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the council. Thank you for this opportunity to comment on agenda item B2, the NOAA cost recovery reports. My name is Chris Woodley. I apologize for not being there in person today. Unfortunately, I got sidetracked with a plumbing emergency at my home, which I've been dealing with for the last several hours. So I'm taking a quick break here. I was hoping to coordinate getting some other stakeholders sitting at the table with me. I can't see what's going on there. I'm assuming that the table is empty. But I would like to draw your attention to the letter in the B reports, which was jointly signed by 11 fishing industry associations, including associations representing the trawl sector, the longline sector, the pot sector, and community development quota groups, all of whom pay NOAA cost recovery fees. I don't think it's inaccurate to say that in this process, it can be quite a challenge to get multiple and diverse stakeholders literally on the same page. So I wanted to thank all of the groups that signed on, expressing their concerns for this important issue of cost recovery reporting. As presented in our letter, all the stakeholders appreciate how robust and effective management by NOAA Fisheries ensures the sustainability of our fisheries, and the industry paying for those management costs associated with our various LAP and rationalization programs is an important obligation on our part. Our letter asks NOAA to collaborate with these stakeholders to improve the transparency and detail provided by NOAA in these cost recovery reports. I want to keep my testimony short here, so I won't dive into the detail provided in the letter, but I wanted to say that I'm extremely pleased that earlier this week I spoke with Josh Keaton, who confirmed that the AK region is very receptive to the industry's request and that he would be initiating efforts in a few weeks to work with the industry stakeholders to address our various concerns. We appreciate that NOAA recognizes this is a matter of significant importance to our fisheries, and I just wanted to publicly thank them for going down this path with us, especially during this time of increased uncertainty within multiple fishing sectors. So again, thank you, Mr. Kurland and your staff for listening to us. That is all I have, and be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Woodley. See if there are any questions for you. Yes, Ms. Kimball.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Woodley. And yes, there is nobody sitting at the table. So I was just going to ask, given your very last comments, there's not a request then from these 11 associations for the council to take any action at this meeting. It's the push and appreciation for working with the agency on these iterations. Okay.
Yeah. Ms. Kimball through the chair. After conversations that I had with Mr. Keaton, and then I heard him report out to the council under the B reports. I think that's all we need at this point to begin this process. This is something that the industry has tried to do in the past, and it's in other regions of the country. It's not always gone smoothly. And but I very, very much appreciate again, Mr. Curlin and the staff's willingness to engage with us on this. So I don't see a role for the council at this time. We certainly look forward to sharing our our concerns regarding these cost recovery reports with the Alaska region.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions. Appreciate your testimony.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Have a good day.
So next up is Brent Payne, Heather Mann, and Stephanie Madsen. And then we'll circle back to Kirill Basarjan and Eva Donberg.
Madam Chair, members of the council, I'm Stephanie Matson with Executive Director of the at-sea processors. With me is Brent Payne from United Catcher Boats and Heather Mann from Midwater Trawlers. Madam Chair, we just wanted to first express or recognize that there are no words to express our empathy and our captain's empathy for the heartbreaking stories that we hear from Western Alaska. It breaks our hearts. And we report those to our captains and they understand. We're in front of you today to just note that in your packet, you have a letter from 4 organizations to the secretary outlining our concerns about the emergency rule petition. We won't need to go into those today. They're very well laid out. But the bottom line is, Madam Chair, members of the council, as heartbreaking as it is, the emergency rule petition does not meet the emergency rule criteria. And we are requesting that the secretary not support the emergency rule petition. So I'll leave it there. We just want to make sure that it didn't get lost in your packets. It's very clear. And again, I don't have any words to express the heartbreaking stories and empathy that we all feel. And our captains are out there doing the best that they can do under the circumstances that we find ourselves in. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll see if there are any questions. Appreciate your time. So we'll circle back to Kirill Basarjan. I think he's joining us online.
Hi, good evening.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Sorry about that. My computer's messing up on me. Apologize. I'm gonna touch base on the EM logbooks that the IPHC has presented here in one of the B reports. As a representative for the small scale fishing fleet, where I represent K-Bay Fisheries, we strongly oppose the implementation of electronic monitoring EM logbooks for vessels under 60 feet. We already have observers on our vessels collecting data and ensuring compliance. EM logbooks are a necessary burden that will disproportionately affect small-scale fishermen like us. Firstly, observers are present on our vessels, providing accurate and reliable data. We trust their expertise and don't need electronic duplicates. EM logbooks will only add to our already heavy administrative burden, taking time and resources away from fishing. Secondly, small-scale fishermen like us operate on thin margins. EM logbooks will increase costs, requiring expensive equipment and training. This will unfairly burden us, potentially putting some of us out of business. Thirdly, if EM logbooks are truly about data collection and not about enforcement, then there is no reason to hold onto the data for more than a year. We propose a 1-year statute of limitations for EM logbooks data. This will prevent enforcement from going back and penalizing fishermen for minor errors like writing one wrong number. It's about fairness and proportionality. Lastly, let's not forget that small-scale fishing vessels like ours are not the problem. When it comes to overfishing or illegal activities, we're the backbone of sustainable fishing with a vested interest in healthy oceans and responsible practices. EM logbooks will only stifle our ability to operate sustainably. In conclusion, I urge you to reject EM logbooks for vessel under 60 feet and adopt a 1-year statute of limitations for EM logbook data. Trust the observers, trust small-scale fishermen, and support sustainable fishing practices. Don't burden us with unnecessary regulations. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll see if there are any questions. Seeing none, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So we'll circle back to Eva Dawn Burke. Okay, we'll just stand down for a couple seconds here, see if she'll join us. I've been informed that she's on her way down, so just a few more moments.
Hello.
Welcome.
Hi, I'm Eva Dawn Burke, new AP member. I am testifying today on behalf of the Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission. As you probably know, Yukon River Intertribal Fish Commission is a signatory on the emergency petition for action related to Chinook salmon bycatch in the Bering Sea pollock trawl fishery. We would like to reiterate our support for the emergency petition to institute a cap of 0 on Chinook bycatch for 180 days. The Western Alaska Chinook stocks continue to decline and reach record low numbers despite the current bycatch cap and efforts to minimize bycatch. Furthermore, there is an immediate need for the council to initiate a regular rulemaking process to scrutinize current Chinook salmon bycatch management while the emergency regulation is in effect. It is extremely important to note that the bycatch caps were set well after several major stock declines. We have struggled to meet our subsistence needs since 2000. Since 2001, we have not met our subsistence needs for 17 of the past 23 years. It is unacceptable for us to prioritize feeding the world from Alaskan waters if we cannot even feed Alaskans. In my personal opinion, the long-term damage to the Yukon River Chinook was already well in progress when the bycatch caps took effect. Action came too late. While we appreciate the prioritization of limiting Chinook bycatch in the trawling fleet, the current efforts are falling short of our needs in river. We need to carefully consider how to best set caps that reflect the current status of our depressed salmon stocks, especially across Western and interior Alaska. Additionally, I've just at my first AP meeting, and we've spent a couple of days discussing Bristol Bay Red King crab closures. A lot of the AP members in there were discussing the possibility of trawlers again increasing Chinook PSC, prohibited species catch, bycatch, in the next few years as area closures are needed to protect Bristol Bay Red King crab. Models are being used to estimate how much of their Chinook PSC will increase if they have to move off areas important to Red King crab. To me, and to others, trawlers are worried about what trade-offs to make between two depressed stocks, crab and salmon. And really, I would really encourage that we start planning for a more equitable and a more just future. We throw language around about environmental justice, but you can't have justice without equity. And you can't have equity unless people share the burden of conservation. And you can't have equity when some people are making millions and some people are going hungry. These fisheries can't support what has historically been taken. Status quo, it's a thing of the past. We're in severe crisis. It is unacceptable to increase pressure on either depressed stock. Our fisheries have already been closed or seriously reduced, and I'm talking about salmon and crab specifically here. It is important that all sectors share the burden of conservation. We urge the council to please take immediate action to prevent acting too late again. We are seeing the lowest numbers of salmon ever. The potential Endangered Species Act listing, it's a clear indication that we need to right the ship. And I've heard, the writing of the ship is going to take time. And I don't think we have that time. I think we need to act a little bit more urgently. As tribes along the river, we expect a meaningful engagement and an opportunity to work with fishery managers to set regulations with checks and balances to ensure our fisheries are working for all sectors and user groups. And I just want to add that I do realize that it's not bycatch alone that is, causing our salmon to decline, but it's only one of three things in my mind that we can actually act on. I'll just list what I think those are. Hatchery production is really causing a lot of competition for our wild stocks. We've been seeing them smaller. We're seeing them sicker. Intercept fisheries. We had a lot of to do with Fish and Game at the Board of Fish Area M early 2023 last year. There is a lot of evidence that intercept fisheries by the state of Alaska. That's another action. So there's two state actions: reduce hatchery, reduce intercept. The federal action is to reduce bycatch. And then the fourth thing in my mind that's really, really affecting stuff is climate change. And we can't just keep using that as an excuse to just continue blazing forward. And I think that even the trawlers know that, and that's not only salmon that have ichthyophonus and are getting sick. It's not only salmon that are getting smaller and fewer. So I think that, we need to act where we can and not wait until it's too late. So thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. See if there are any questions for you. Yes, Mr. Down.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for your testimony and your articulation of your position on the emergency action. For several years now, we've heard asks at the council on zero salmon bycatch in the pollock fishery. And so there's a little bit different nexus here, and I just wondered if you could articulate for me why that position, well, what's the reason for the 180 days? I mean, what was the reason in emergency action to ask for that short-term 180 days for the emergency action? Was that a legal issue that you came up with, or is there some type of a belief or a strategy involved in that? I'm just curious from your position why that I hadn't heard that in all of the public testimony that we'd heard, that there would be a closure for a certain amount of time or certain months or something. So I thought I'd give you a chance to address that.
Yes, thank you for the question through the chair. Yes, I was not part of the original writing of this petition, so I can't exactly say, but my guess is to minimize bycatch at a time that we're expecting the salmon to return to the rivers, and at a time that we'll have more information if we met our escapement. Because as you know, we haven't even been able to subsistence fish. We're going on the 4th year now. So thank you.
Thank you again for your testimony.
Thank you.
That concludes our public testimony on B reports. We have yet to take an afternoon break. I think We will do so now, come back at 4:20 and see if there's any further discussion from the council on B reports. I know. Council, please come back to order. Council members, please come back to order. Welcome back, everyone. So we have completed our staff presentations on B reports. We've received public testimony. See if the council has any further discussion on B reports or any actions that they would like to take. Mr. Toy.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I'll bet lead off. This is regarding the request from the agency for comments on the EFP that's been proposed. And I would recommend that the council go on record to the agency as being strongly supportive of the EFP and appreciative of the work that both the agency and the project managers have put into it to date.
Thank you, Mr. Twite. Ms. Vanderhoven.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't have a motion or anything. I just wanted to speak to the cost recovery letter that we received from industry that Mr. Keaton noted in his report that those conversations had already started. And I just wanted to reiterate that it's an issue I think the council has been interested in for a long time, and it's nice to see some forward progress maybe happening, and not looking for anything formal, but keeping the council updated on how that progress is going, I think would be appreciated by the council.
Thank you, Mr. Curlin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Keaton has already spoken to that. We're on top of it. We certainly aim to provide a more thorough and transparent report next year.
Thank you, Mr. Curlin. Ms. Kimball.
Thank you. This might be off of council members' radar, but I was bringing us back to the IRA update. And I know from Mr. Witherell, we were told, those projects have already been submitted, and that's great. I commend them for getting that going. But I just asked a couple questions about the objectives that are in the IRA update, and particularly on page 2 of that paper. And one of them is on expand and refine on-ramps and opportunities to incorporate LK and TK into the council management processes alongside Western science. And I think that's a great objective. The two kind of actions underneath there, I think I wanted to ask Mr. Witherell again, if those, we have any opportunity for future iterations of this kind of progress to be modified slightly. And I ask because one of them is that the council will implement revisions to council procedures based on workshop recommendations, including a template for how LKTK should be considered in council amendment analyses. We just had a full task force dedicated to this process, whereby they provided us a full protocol that we adopted and a series of on-ramps, including a template for how LKTK should be considered in council amendment analyses. And this may just be a clarification or a modification of language and not intent. But I would hope that the council's intent, and I would look for nods around the table, is that we are committed to the work that we've already approved. We are not revisiting that work or redoing that work. Clearly, we have an opportunity to expand into other regions, since that was just applicable to the Bering Sea, and that was made clear. But that work stands alone, and any kind of furtherance of that work doesn't kind of modify what the group has already done. So that's not a motion, but it's important, and it's important relative to our previous recommendations and the work that those folks did for the council on getting us as far as they did on the protocol and the on-ramps. So I just think it could be misinterpreted. I've already gotten a couple members that have contacted me about it being misinterpreted. So I think it's important to bring out. There's no motion. I'm certainly glad to expand upon it if any council members have no idea what I'm referring to right now.
Thank you, Ms. Kimball. Mr. Witherell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Kimball. I think that's a good clarification to make. And yes, you're correct. The intent is not to do anything other than the work that's already been committed relative to LKTK. I think the concept was to add additional details to the direction that's already been given from the council.
Thank you. And maybe easy modifications to this would be that the council will be implementing revisions to procedures based on, the council and task force's recommendations. That might make it a little bit clearer, and it's a really easy fix. But I think it's important to the people that spent their time putting that work in for the council, especially the Alaska Native organizations that spent their time doing that for this council. So anything we can do to communicate the value of that work and how it's going to be used in the future, I think is very, very appreciated. Thanks for listening to that.
Thank you for circling back to that and providing that clarification. I'm seeing some head nods and thumbs. So. Anything further? Ms. Baker.
Through the chair, thank you. I did want to be responsive to the request from the National Marine Fisheries Service for council input on the emergency rule petition to implement a 0 Chinook salmon PSC limit for the pollock fishery at the beginning of the 2024 fishing season, or as early as possible. And what I would propose, Madam Chair, I do not have a motion, my apologies, but I was thinking I would offer some suggested comments that if the council agreed or wanted to provide supplemental comments, that we could ask Mr. Witherell to put in a draft letter to the National Marine Fisheries Service. So I'm sorry, I don't have it written down. I was reviewing the petition and obviously listening to testimony, and have developed these recommendations that I'll provide to the council. To the National Marine Fisheries Service. In evaluating whether to grant an emergency rule petition, there are several considerations, as I understand it, that NOAA Fisheries must evaluate. And there are specific emergency rule criteria that have to be met in terms of whether an emergency exists involving a fishery in order to meet the first test of an emergency rule criteria. There are 3 criteria, and you may remember that in evaluating a similar emergency rule petition a few years ago for a 0 Chinook salmon PSC limit for the pollock fishery, as well as implementing a chum salmon PSC cap, the NOAA Fisheries determined that emergency rule petition did not meet all 3 emergency rule criteria. And in particular, I think the one that stood out to me was criteria 3, that the emergency can be addressed through emergency regulations for which the immediate benefits outweigh the value of advance notice, public comment, and deliberate consideration. And I see that determination for the previous emergency rule petition being directly applicable to the one in front of the agency right now. Considering the scientific information that's available, determining contributing to the ongoing decline of Chinook salmon stocks in fisheries in Western Alaska. The best available information indicates that Chinook salmon bycatch in the Bering Sea pollock fishery comprises less than 4% of the returns to Western Alaska river systems in recent years. And therefore, it's my recommendation to the council to consider that closure of the Bering Sea pollock fishery in 2024, which would be the result of implementation of a 0 Chinook salmon PSC limit, is unlikely to result in meeting escapement goals or substantively increasing the likelihood of improving subsistence or commercial harvests in 2024. The second test that
that NIMS must apply to emergency rule petitions is that any forthcoming regulation would be consistent with the national standards under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. And again, referring to the previous agency determination about the emergency rule petition, a 0 Chinook salmon PSC limit is not consistent with National Standard 9, which requires fishery conservation and management measures, minimize bycatch and bycatch mortality to the extent practicable. And NOAA Fisheries determined at that time, and I think that determination applies to this petition as well, that a 0 Chinook salmon PSC limit for the pollock fishery is not practicable and therefore cannot be granted because the action wouldn't be consistent with the national standards. And Madam Chair, in an effort to try to be clear and concise, those would be my recommendations for the council to consider recommending to the National Marine Fisheries Service for its consideration of this petition.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. See if there are any other comments. Ms. Kimball.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the rationale, which is basically the agency's rationale from the previous petition, is still sound. I wonder if a letter, and I saw Mr. Witherell taking notes, if it might help, since part of the petition was actually asking, is the council continually, scrutinizing or evaluating whether the current management program is working, and so there are several ways. I think the letter could help the secretary understand at least what the council is currently doing to continually evaluate whether the Chinook salmon bycatch avoidance programs, including the bycatch limits, are working to minimize Chinook bycatch to the extent practicable, as is our mandate. I could list those, but there's several things on probably 3 of our 5 agendas that have us doing that evaluation, not the least of which is the AEQ analyses that we did last year or the year before. So that might help the secretary with some context on what we're doing in the council process. It doesn't speak to the emergency criteria, but it might lend some context for our actions, if it's helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Kimball. See Mr. Witherell taking notes. Any other comments? Mr. Down.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to Nicole. It addressed one of my thoughts here, but to further that, I just want to, for the benefit of the public and the people who testified on this and have written the letters on this, just to add a short description. This is a request for Mr. Witherell, or just clarify that the council will see this these points that were, I think, concise and clear, and I appreciate that, in writing at some point at this meeting. Is that right, or this letter will be something that we'll see in the future, or we're just going to take that? So I'm just curious, and that question really is to address. I'm sure there's members of the public have the same question in their mind right now, like, what does this mean? Where does that go? How does that work? So anything that could be added for that benefit would be good.
Madam Chair, Mr. Down, I was not anticipating attempting to draft that letter at this meeting. It will take some time to go through and look at the points that were made in the previous determination. We have not prepared a letter to this effect the last time, so I'll be starting from scratch, and I think it's a important enough letter that it would require some critical review by council members and leadership, particularly before it gets submitted to the National Marine Fisheries Service. So I don't intend to rush a draft during this meeting.
Mr. Down.
Yeah, just to add on to that, I'm fine personally with what Mr. Witherell is proposing, that take some time, write the letter, and that leadership would see that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. Anything else to address? Mr. Toy.
I was thinking, some about Ms. Kimball's suggestions for the letter, sort of building on, Deputy Commissioner Baker's thoughts initially, and, I think it's useful to, as well reiterate, that the council does, have a sense of the, immensity of the impacts of the current Chinook situation on, particularly on the peoples who depend so much on Chinook, and that our, our commitment is to continue to, and again, as Ms. Kimball said, this isn't necessarily relevant to the emergency petition, but just it's an opportunity to remind that, our bycatch program is sort of built around the notion that there is no right amount of bycatch, and that every single Chinook that can be saved is important throughout the season. And that industry assures us that they keep their skippers reminded of that regularly, and reminded as well of the reasons why we take this so seriously, that that we understand this is a crisis facing Western Alaskans, and that we will continue to, as a council, ensure that skippers and others on the water are doing everything they can to avoid every single Chinook that can be avoided. And again, I recognize that's not relevant to this particular thing, but just our understanding of the commitment that there is no right number of Chinook bycatch, and that's the underlying sort of philosophy of the bycatch management program.
Thank you, Mr. Toy. Anything further on this or any other issues on B reports? Mr. Carlin.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I appreciate the discussion around this and the council's desire to provide a comment letter. It was important to me to extend the opportunity to the council to weigh in on this, even though it was a request to the secretary to make this determination. We don't have a set time frame for making a decision on this, but whenever we get a request for emergency action, we endeavor to make a prompt decision. So I know Mr. Witherell's aware of that, but the sooner we get comments from the council, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mesereau.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And my question is really for Mr. Curlin, if that's appropriate at this time. Mr. Curlin, you had, one of you characterized this as something where you would make a determination and then post the findings in the Federal Register within 90 days. Is that right? Or do you, what I'm getting at is that both this and the other Chinook salmon legal issue that's in the agenda, these things are having real tangible impacts on the Alaska brand. And I'm getting people calling me saying they don't want to go fishing where I am because they've seen that there's king salmon may be considered endangered and they don't want to go fishing for those things. This is really happening in real time as these sort of things come up. And so I guess what I'm asking you is, do you plan, when you make a determination on this and other relevant issues, when the results come out, do you plan on expressing those to the general public in the way that maybe you did with the whale take, where you put out a press release that people can grab onto and pass around to sort of either let people know what's happening one way or the other? I think both people that have testified in favor of this and against it probably want to know as soon as possible. And I'm just wondering if there's a way to make sure you distribute the findings of this and whatever else comes up with the other one broadly, so that the public can really know what's going on.
Yeah, through the chair, Mr. Mesereau, thanks for the question. So just to be clear, we've got a couple of different types of petitions here. So to clarify for the public, there is an Endangered Species Act petition for listing Chinook from streams in southern Alaska draining to the Gulf of Alaska. And then this is a request under the Magnuson-Stevens Act for exercising our emergency authority to limit bycatch for the pollock fishery. So the 90-day finding that you referenced, Mr. Mesereau, is relevant for the ESA petition, not for this one in particular. And under the ESA, we have to make an initial determination on the petition we received within 90 days to the extent practicable. So sometimes it takes longer than 90 days as to whether the petition presents sufficient information to indicate that further review is needed and that we would need to do a status review under the ESA. That is something that when we make that 90-day finding, we do publish that in the Federal Register. And it is common that we would accompany that with some sort of a web story or a news release because of the degree of public interest. For a petition for emergency action under the Magnuson-Stevens Act, there isn't a requirement for us to publish that in the Federal Register. But again, given the amount of public interest, it would not be unusual for us to do a web story or a news release or something like that to get the word out.
Thank you, Mr. Mesereau, Mr. Perlin. Ms. Kimball.
Thank you. Just last comment that I recognize this is not, the petition is not a council action. It was not submitted to the council. It was submitted directly to the secretary. So it's the secretary's action, but I do appreciate, since it overlapped with the council meeting, the opportunity for the council to provide some input, for the public to provide some input. So I wanted to express appreciation to Mr. Kurland for making that work for the agenda. Thanks.
Thank you. And anything else on B reports? Seeing none, that brings us to pretty much the end of the day. And just a reminder that there will be a reception tonight at 6 p.m. on the 3rd floor. So just in about an hour. So please do join us if you can. And we will recess for the evening and reconvene tomorrow at 8 a.m. Thank you. We'll begin the discussion with C1 tomorrow morning.